Good evening, everyone. How are you? My name is Dr. Carol Kelly, and I'm the very proud superintendent of Princeton Public Schools. On behalf of Princeton Public School Board of Education, administration, and staff, I would like to thank all of you for being in attendance this evening. I'd like to give a special thank you to Ms. Valerie Ulrich for forming this partnership between our school district with Princeton Suppers. And through an endowment from a former Riverside teacher and champion of our school gardens program, Dorothy Mullen, Princeton Suppers is launching this Dorothy Mullen Speaker Series. Even before I began my new role in Princeton Public Schools in July, I heard of the name Dorothy Mullen. I so wish I had the opportunity to know her personally, but I'm very thankful for her legacy, and I'm grateful to be in attendance this evening for the program Helping Children Feel Their Best, Nutrition-Based Therapeutics. Many thanks to all of you who are in attendance, and I hope and I know you will enjoy tonight's speaker. Now, without further ado, I'd like to bring to the mic the Executive Director of Eating for Your Health, Mrs. Marion Renson. Marion?
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I am Marion Ryanson, the Executive Director of Eating for Your Health by Suppers. And this is the first of our series that we are going to be delivering for the Princeton Public Schools and schools beyond our borders about the importance of eating whole foods. It's the first of the series of the Dorothy Mullen Speaker Series. So about eating for your health, it's our mission to share the benefits associated with cooking and eating whole foods for your health. We provide support to help prevent and reduce the impact from chronic disease. So many people come to our programs with a new diagnosis or a threat of a diagnosis, or someone they love and care for has a health concern, and we help them learn ways of healthy eating that works for them. Dr. Pisharody will be discussing the widespread health concern of metabolic syndrome, and we know that awareness is the first step, and many chronic diseases can often be managed and sometimes even reversed by making lifestyle changes and changing what and how you eat. And this is where we want to support you. We provide courses and programs informed by robust science and research, all reviewed by our Chief Medical Advisor, endocrinologist, Dr. Addie Benito. And we also, one of the most important parts of our programming is to provide a non-judgmental environment in which people can learn about ways to eat for their health. This non-judgmental approach is key, as we know that people learn best when they're not feeling judged. So right now, you're in a judgment-free zone, as you would be in any Eating for Your Health program. And I want to emphasize the importance of not judging others, but it's also equally important not to judge yourself. Determining and changing the way you eat to move in eating in a healthier way is a process, and everyone moves at their own pace. And I do want to give a tremendous thank you to Valerie Ulrich for making this program possible, and for Dr. Kelly for also introducing us and giving us this opportunity to share this message. We truly value the relationship with Princeton Public Schools. And next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pisharody. We are so grateful to have her present this lesson on metabolic syndrome, what it is, why it matters, and what you can do about it. Dr. Pisharody is a pediatric gastroenterologist with a practice in Seattle, Washington. She's passionate about helping children and families understand the connection between the food they eat, digestive health, and overall well-being. Dr. Pisharody is a 2021 Seattle Met Top Doc Award winner and participates in the Medical Advisory Committee for the Northwest chapter of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. She's the co-medical director for Camp Oasis, an annual camp for kids with Crohn and colitis. We view each other as partners in helping people learn about eating in a healthier way. After Dr. Pisharody's talk, we'll have time for a Q&A. If you have any questions during the program, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will introduce them to Dr. Pisharody if that makes sense at that time. But we will definitely be addressing any questions that you have. So again, please feel free to put them in the chat. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pisharody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, Valerie, Marion, and especially, yes, to the legacy of the beautiful J.E.R.F. Mullen, whom I also didn't get an opportunity to meet, but I have heard of, and interacting with her suppers program, now Eating for Health, has been very impactful. And so I'm really honored, and it's quite a privilege to be able to be the inaugural speaker for the J.E.R.F. Mullen speaker series. And I'm going to share my slides here and start my talk, and it'll take me about 30 minutes, and then I'm happy to take any questions. The title of my talk is Metabolic Health, and hopefully during these 30 minutes, I can show you why this is so important to me and why I'm so passionate about it, and hopefully convince all of you why it should also matter to you. So a little bit of background about how I got into this. I'm a pediatrician, and I became a pediatrician because I love children. In fact, I had decided either I was going to be a pediatrician or I was going to be a teacher. So it's just outstanding that I'm getting to talk to on behalf of this program for the Princeton public school teachers and all of you, because, children are dear and near to all of our hearts. And I did my medical school training in India and was exposed to a lot of the traditional sense of malnutrition, starvation, famine, under access to food. And that is what put me into the interest of becoming a gastroenterologist, because in the subspecialty of pediatrics, gastroenterologists take care of most of the nutritional concern. So it's sort of come full circle for me now. I live in the United States, I'm practicing in Seattle, Washington, and I'm continuing to take care of malnutrition, but it's sort of been a shift in population health that in these 20 years or so that I have been a doctor, it's been a shift in population health from the traditional sense of malnutrition, from under access to food, to now the type of chronic malnutrition that we're seeing from over access to nutrient poor, calorie-rich, hyper-palatable, poor quality foods, these so-called ultra-processed foods. And in the world today, while we're still seeing about 800 million starving people, we're seeing almost equal amounts of people dying the chronic deaths from this sort of obesity and its related diseases. And this, again, has happened in my lifetime, in my career of 20 years. And so that is why I want us to sort of focus not so much on obesity, but the related condition of metabolic syndrome, which is what my talk will largely be focusing on. So some of the basics, we will cover obesity, and that is this epidemic that we've seen. In fact, I would say it is the pandemic of the century. Since 1980, the obesity rate has doubled in 73 countries and increased in 113 others. So whether it's a developing nation or a developed nation, no nation, not one, has been able to reduce this obesity rate. Since the 1970s, the obesity rate has actually nearly tripled in the United States. It's doubled in most of the world since the 1980s. And even in Africa, we used to see mostly starvation and famine. We are now seeing obesity rates doubling. So obesity is the pandemic of the century. And it's something that we need to think of, because it's changed like this in such a quick amount of time, 35, 40 years, as almost like an infectious disease in the sense that it's some sort of exposure. In 1970, what was it that we were not being exposed to that has caused this epidemic of obesity and related diseases? And that is what we will focus on, and it's largely ultra-processed food. So almost 2 billion, that's a quarter of the world's population currently, are overweight. Over 650 million people, that's about 15% of the world's population, are now considered obese. And that includes nearly 50 million children, and not any children, but children under the age of 5. So this has happened in such a span of time. We have to really think, what is the exposure? What are we getting exposed to that has changed our environment? So obesity versus metabolic syndrome, that's really what the crux of the conversation is about. So if we look at the World Health Organization, the way they define obesity makes sense to me. It's not about weight or BMI, but it's an abnormal or excessive fat accumulation that presents a risk to health. And what is that risk to health? Well, that's the relationship between obesity and metabolic syndrome. They have a correlation, but obesity doesn't necessarily cause metabolic syndrome. So what we need to focus on is this phenomenon of metabolic syndrome, which is actually a cluster of conditions that increases the risk of early death from heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. This is what we need to worry about. And I will redefine in a few slides. This is defined as having weight accumulation or obesity, we could say, in the middle of our body, visceral obesity, as we call it, which will be measured by a large waist circumference because it's measuring how much fat accumulation is happening in the viscera, in the liver and around the liver, in the organs of the abdomen. So large waist circumference, high blood pressure, abnormal blood lipid levels, and insulin resistance. Remember that term, insulin resistance, which leads us to be resistant to the effects of a hormone called insulin, which causes our insulin levels to actually be high to sort of fight back against us. So if we have one of these symptoms, then we're defined as having metabolic syndrome. This can be correlated with obesity, but is not caused by obesity per se. So in terms of what's happening in the United States alone right now, we have data to show that if you look at anyone over the age of 20, the vast majority of us are either considered overweight, obese, or severely obese. That being said, that is not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the phenomenon, as I mentioned, of metabolic syndrome. And that overlaps with both the normal weight individuals and the not normal weight individuals. So metabolic syndrome currently affects at least 40%. It's estimated that within 10 years, we'll have half of the United States population affected by metabolic syndrome. And if we look in terms of the normal weight individuals, even 40% of them, so even half of them also have metabolic syndrome. But there's also a sliver of the people who are considered overweight, obese, or severely obese who do not have the metabolic syndrome. So if we focus too much on weight, we will miss the boat in terms of what's really killing us, which is the metabolic syndrome. And so that's why we need to focus away from obesity and talk more about metabolic health, metabolic syndrome. Obesity is not the problem. And if I need to hit this home anymore, I can look at these statistics. So obesity rates have actually increased worldwide by about 2% per year. But diabetes, and I want you to remember that 90% of world diabetes now is type 2 diabetes, which is caused by the insulin resistance, which is from the metabolic syndrome. That diabetes is rising by 4% per year, more than 4% per year. So if obesity was the problem, then we should see these rates sort of paralleling each other, and we're seeing diabetes rates go up much higher than obesity rates. In fact, in the year 2000, 150 million people in the world had diabetes, and it was estimated that the rate would increase by about 3 or 4% per year. Actually, as of 2020, 500 million people in the world now have type 2 diabetes, and that's actually been an increase of 12.5% per year. So it's increasing at rapid speed, and this is because we've been over-focused on obesity and completely missed the boat. So everything we as medical professionals know about obesity and have been focusing on with obesity has been wrong. And that's what led to this pandemic of metabolic syndrome. Because really health is not about counting calories or energy balance or body mass index or the weight on the scale. We all know diets don't work, restricting doesn't work, and it's not about exercise. It's not about this calories in and calories out theory. What it really is about our biology and our biochemistry, and that's the insulin resistance, which I will talk about. And we need to reverse that biochemistry, and that comes from understanding the importance of quality of food, not quantity, but the quality of the food. And that, if we understand, we will understand how to reverse metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome, again, defined as organ damage from insulin resistance and fat accumulation, not obesity, but fat accumulation in the viscera, especially in the liver. And I'll talk about this specifically because as a pediatric gastroenterologist, I take care of liver diseases. And we can identify this when we see that a person has any or all of these 4 factors that will increase their chance of early death. which is an increased waist circumference, as I mentioned before, abnormal blood lipid levels, which is a high triglyceride compared to a low HDL cholesterol or high density lipoprotein, and then a high blood pressure and insulin resistance. But again, it's driven by that high insulin level, which I will explain in a second here. So it's really driven by the poor quality of the foods that are high in sugar, low in fiber, injected with lots of additives now make up more than 2/3 of the foods that our children and adults are exposed to. And that is causing this metabolic syndrome. So I mentioned the word visceral adiposity or fat in and around the liver. And to explain that just sort of visually, I'm going to show you a few MRI scans. And I just want to explain what's being seen. So if you are looking head on at someone, they're facing you, and you were to look inside their body with this MRI scan, this is what you would see. First, you can pay attention to that middle. I'm just going to label everything for you. Those white lines delineate the spine. You can see the vertebral discs highlighted in there. Pay attention to the collarbones. They're on the top. This is just to sort of give you a layout of the anatomy. Right under those collarbones, you can see the pink, soft, spongy tissue. Those are the lungs. On either side of the spine, lower down in the pelvis, you see the kidneys I've highlighted in blue. And then right above the kidneys, under the lungs, is this large organ. It's sort of black and shaded dark here. This is the liver, which we will pay attention to as we look at a few more MRI scans. This sort of grayish black color is the muscle. And then lastly, this is the color we see on an MRI scan with subcutaneous fat or fat anywhere in the body. It'll be this sort of grayed out color. And so with that in mind, I want us to look at these 3 MRI scans. The one on the left is actually the one I just showed you. The lungs here at the top, the liver, the subcutaneous fat, the spine in the middle. This is a person who you can tell has some extra love handles, some fat on their hips. They have increased subcutaneous fat. So by looking at them from the outside, we may actually consider this person unhealthy or obese, but we would be wrong because they carry very little fat in their organs, especially in their liver. You see how black and pristine their liver looks? They have very little fat inside of their liver. They have healthy organs, healthy viscera, healthy livers, and they're actually what we call MHO or metabolically healthy, but obese. This is a person who's going to have a long, healthy life. Normal livers can have up to 5% fat. This person's liver fat percentage calculated on this MRI scan is a mere 2.6%. Take that in comparison to the MRI scan on the right. This is a person who has relatively low subcutaneous fat stores. If we were to look at them from the outside, we'd actually think they were kind of thin. And we might not worry about them as medical professionals because we were so focused on obesity. I think we allowed the metabolic syndrome inside of these types of people to be missed because we were only looking at what their body habitus or their BMI or their weight was. And inside, we can actually see their livers are quite gray. You can see the fat surrounding their kidneys. You can see fat in their abdomen surrounding the organs, including in the liver. And when their liver fat, remember, less than 5% is normal is calculated, they actually have 23. So a quarter of their liver is now fat. So this is another term we have in medicine called TOFI, or thin on the outside, fat on the inside. This is a person who's going to be at increased risk of death because they have metabolic syndrome. And then the person in the middle, they are not only visibly overweight, we can see the subcutaneous fat when we look at them, and we can see that on the MRI scan. They also are having more of this grayish tissue around their organs, around their kidney, and also noticeably in their liver. Their liver fat is also 24%. So this is the difference between being metabolically healthy versus just overweight or having obesity. It's not about what we look like on the outside. It's not about this number on the scale. It's about what's happening on the inside. And so we really, as a medical professional, missed the boat on this. We've been relying too much on weight and body mass index. And we've not realized that up to 50% of women and even 20% of men with normal BMIs can actually be metabolically sick with increased visceral and or liver fat. So it's really not about being overweight, but being over fat on the inside. And as I tell my patients, I'd rather you be fat and fit than thin and sick. And we need to stop as a medical society really sort of saying if someone's overweight, oh, they need to lose weight. And if we see a skinny person or thin person, just assuming that they're healthy, because looks obviously can be deceiving. So how does this happen? How do we start to store more fat in the liver, around the liver, and in the viscera? It really happens because of a phenomenon of high insulin levels, which I alluded to. And I just want to explain that now in this slide. So normally, when we haven't eaten for a while and our blood glucose is falling, our body immediately sends very powerful biochemical signals through our brain to tell us that it's time to eat. Our stomach starts to gurgle, we start to feel hungry, and we will start to eat. And once we've reached a threshold where we're eaten enough to start storing energy and some fat deposits are getting filled, when a fat cell starts to be filled, a hormone gets secreted from that fat cell. And that hormone's name is leptin. It's the satiety hormone. It tells us that we're satisfied, we're full, and we need to stop eating. That signal is very powerful back to the brain. The hypothalamus in the brain has a receptor for leptin. And once that leptin has bound to its receptor, our brain sends us back a signal to say, you're full, we'll feel nauseated, we'll feel bloated, we won't want to eat anymore. And if that signal is working, then we stop eating. That is what happens in a normal insulin secreting state. The problem is, in today's age, compared to about 30 or 40 years ago, most of us secrete a higher amount of baseline insulin. And when our insulin levels are high, then our pancreas is secreting all this extra insulin all the time. Insulin actually has a chance to beat leptin to that receptor in the hypothalamus in the brain. And when insulin is already blocking that leptin receptor, we become resistant to having the leptin receive it, get its signal across. And so we never get that satiety or satisfied or full feeling. We're always sensing starvation. We're always thinking we need to eat more. And so instead of becoming full or sensing leptin, we continue to eat, and then that cycle repeats itself. And that, if you remember nothing else from this talk, is how metabolic syndrome happens. We don't develop metabolic syndrome from overeating, but we overeat because we have metabolic syndrome. Because we're leptin resistant, because we have a high insulin level, we end up overeating. So obesity is actually the after effect of the biochemistry. It's the biochemistry that drives the behaviors and not the reverse. Because I think a lot of times we blame someone for overeating, and that's the reason for their being obese or overweight or being sick, and it's actually that the insulin was high to begin with. And so we need to go back to thinking, why is that insulin high? 75 to 80% of obesity then is due to this phenomenon of hyperinsulinemia. In fact, we have good research to show today the average child and adult, and this is irregardless of their weight, releases twice, at least double the amount of insulin compared to what they did 40 years ago. And how could that be? What happened in the last 30, 40 years? And that's because of processed food. So 74% of packaged processed foods contain added sugar. This is so much more sugar exposure than we were ever getting when I was a child. I'm almost 50 years old. So this greater sugar availability alone accounts for 25% of the world's diabetes epidemic. And as I mentioned before, 90% of the world's diabetes is type 2 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes means metabolic syndrome. Along with sugar being cheaper and sugar being added to everything, we also know that serving sizes have tripled since the 1950s. So we're just inundated with more of this sugar in all of these packaged and processed foods. So sugar is hiding, and I say hiding on purpose in 74% of packaged foods, because there's good data to support this was done with malintent by these 10 or 11 international food conglomerates. They started adding sugar to food, number one, because it was cheaper. They could get us to buy more. It was hyper palatable. We would love the taste. We would buy more of their product. They did it for their bottom dollar to make more profit off of us, knowing that it was unhealthy. And they knew this, and we can see that by the fact that they have so many synonyms for sugar. If they wanted us to know that they had added sugar to all of our foods, they would have just called it sugar. There's no need for them to have 56, and actually at last count it's 262 names for sugar if they wanted to just call it what it was. They cover it up. They don't tell us about it. They add it now to everything that they sell to us, even as healthy foods. It's in the vitamins, it's in probiotic gummies, it's in granola bars, it's in health yogurts, it's in breakfast cereals, you name it. If you don't look carefully, you're going to miss the fact that most of the things we buy in the store, the things that have a barcode, the things that are processed and packaged foods have some degree of sugar added to them, and very slyly at that. And so I always give this example. If you don't look, you won't know. And this is actually a sugar packet that is still being given out in my hospital cafeteria. And you would probably just open this up and sprinkle it on your food. But I'm so suspicious now of everything I put in my mouth. If it comes in a package, I have to turn it around. And even in this little salt packet, you can see the word dextrose, and dextrose is one of these synonyms that the food industry has for sugar. So unless we're paying attention this closely to everything that we eat, we are inundated with sugar from all of these packaged and processed foods. And then the other reason the food industry purposely adds sugar to everything is because they know it increases our dopamine. And dopamine is the hormone in the brain, the ancient part of our brain that increases pleasure and cravings. So the food industry knows from their research that sugar can be 8 times more addictive than cocaine and heroin. So they have to add 1 or 2 or 3 grams of sugar. You won't even know it's there. It might not even be a sweet food, but your brain's going to light up like these PET scans show in the middle, just like when you get one of these addictive drugs, and you're going to crave that food, buy more of their food, and become addicted to their food, which increases their bottom dollar, and they couldn't care less about our health. I always say that I love this quote from someone where they said, we have a food industry that cares nothing about our health, and we have a healthcare industry that really doesn't know much about food. So it behooves us to take the responsibility to start paying attention to these food labels and make sure that we are not exposing ourselves not only to too much sugar, but in general, a lot of these processed foods. And now I'm just going to shift a little bit and specifically talk about that fat in the liver, because as a gastroenterologist, this is what sort of drove me into being so passionate about this. So there is a condition you all know, it's called alcoholic fatty liver disease, AFLD, that if we drink too much alcohol, our livers get sick, we can have fatty livers, and that can develop into cirrhosis. Then lo and behold, in about 1982, adults started being noticed that had this same fatty liver disease that were not drinking alcohol. And then by the middle of the 1980s, we started to see children with this disease. And obviously children aren't exposed to alcohol. So somebody slapped an N in front of this and called it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's the same disease as alcoholics, but happening in children, happening in people who have never seen, touched, or drank alcohol. And lo and behold, this is a mystery disease being described in the 1980s. And now this is the most common chronic liver disease in the world in children. We now think 1 in 3 adults has this disease, and 1 in 10, possibly 1 in 7 children has this disease. It's the most common chronic liver disease. It's overtaken hepatitis C in terms of the indication for liver transplant. It is the most common indication for liver transplant in young adults and in women now. What is this condition that's causing fatty liver disease like alcohol, but it's not from alcohol? And this is just an example of what that means. A healthy liver on the left here, and what fatty livers look like. Basically, the fat cells are replaced. And that's what we saw on the MRI scans, that white sort of gray tissue. This is what it looks like actually when you look at the liver. Basically, it's a fat, oily liver. And when fat replaces the normal healthy liver cells, the liver doesn't work. And under the microscope, you will take this sort of pink, healthy, normal liver tissue and replace it with these fat droplets. So it becomes really foie gras. So children aren't becoming alcoholics, but they're getting this disease. And 1 in 3 adults has this. Now 1 in 10 children has this. What is causing this mysterious disease where their healthy livers get replaced by fat, and they develop this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. For a long time, it was a mystery. And I'll tell you, I did not learn about this in medical school happening to kids. I was not exposed to this in residency. And then it was in my second year of fellowship, so I'm talking 2005-ish, that I started getting referrals for this. And I remember the professors who were teaching me, we still didn't know what caused this. There was some thoughts out there that it was from obesity, because a lot of these kids were overweight, and we would tell children to lose weight or exercise more. It never worked. Really didn't know what was causing this disease. And then it's only been in sort of the last 10 or 15 years that we now understand it is fructose, and fructose is found in sugar. So it turns out now we know that the enzymatic pathways, the biochemical pathways in the liver that break down alcohol, are exactly the same processes as the way the liver breaks down sugar or fructose. And fructose, I just want to explain here, is part of the molecule found in sugar. So sugar, the white stuff, is actually sucrose, and that's two molecules put together, fructose plus glucose. The fructose, which is actually the sweet part of sugar, is going to go to the liver and is a hepatotoxin or a liver toxin, just like alcohol. So I tell kids, when you drink juice or you drink a fruit smoothie, you're basically, having alcohol. And if you have too much of that type of sugar, fructose, you're going to damage your liver just like drinking too much alcohol. So it's this free fructose can only be used by the liver. Free fructose can only be used by the liver cells. No other cell in the human body has any way of metabolizing this free fructose, so it gets rapidly taken up by the liver, and the liver gets inundated with this and converts it into fat. So fatty liver disease is not caused by fat. It's not caused by obesity. It's not caused by eating too much or calories. It's caused specifically by free fructose, which is in sugar. And remember that we have been inundated with sugars ever since the food industry started putting it in everything that's packaged. At this point, I just want to give a caveat, because I'm sure everyone's asking me about fructose, which is found in fruit. So remember, you cannot get liver disease or metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes by eating too much fruit. And that is because beautiful Mother Nature put the fructose in fruit, first of all, in small quantities, and envelop that fructose with 2 layers of fiber. By the time the digestive tract breaks down all of that fiber, the fructose has bypassed the liver and goes into the small or large intestine, and we excrete it. So if inherently bound to fiber, like you would find in whole fruit, fructose gets excreted out of the body. It's the free fructose, which is what happens to fructose when it's no longer bound to fiber, which is what happens when you put a fruit in a blender. So fruit smoothies, fruit juices, these are a form of processed food. These can cause harm to the liver, but eating fruit would be just fine.
If I could just say one thing about this, and I know that people, when you tell people that their fruit smoothies aren't the best thing for them, the fruit needs to make the other healthy ingredients in there palatable. So if you have other vegetables and you have nuts and other things that are in your smoothie, the little bit of fruit helps to make it palatable, but it is best to eat your fruit.
Yeah.
And also, and even anytime, as you said, every time you process a food, even if you process it yourself in a blender, a bit of that nutritional value is processed out. And in this case, it's the fiber, and it makes the sugar more available. So again, don't be too hard on yourself if you've been doing this. Just know now you know. You can't unknow. So,
and I also want to explain that it's too much sugar. And I'm going to go over that in the next slide. So if you need, we've eaten honey for millennia, and we've had fruits and exposure to sweets. Even in 1970s, we were baking and having sugar. It's the amount. So the upper limit of sugar intake that a normal healthy liver can metabolize is about 24 grams in 24 hours. So if you're adding a little bit of fruit to a smoothie to make that smoothie palatable, as long as you don't exceed the 24 gram limit, we're not going to develop fatty liver disease. So I do want to, concur that this is not about just having a little bit of sugar. It's about exceeding the limits. And that is so easy when we're relying on processed foods. So compared to how much sugar we were exposed to maybe 50 years ago, we're averaging at least 10 or 20 times more that. On average, teenagers now, instead of limiting it to about 6 teaspoons, which is the 24 grams, they're getting close to 19 or 20 teaspoons. Children are getting about 9 teaspoons per day, so far exceeding those upper limits of normal. We would all recognize that a 12-ounce can of soda is not healthy for us, that it probably has a lot of sugar, but we can get duped by when we drink these sort of smoothies. And one 15-ounce serving of this smoothie actually gives us 47 grams of free sugar. We would all recognize that a donut probably has a lot of sugar in it, but these Cliff Bars, which some of us turn to as a healthy snack, also can have a lot of sugar. This is a yogurt parfait. We may recognize that the sweetened yogurt would have a lot of sugar and turn to maybe something so-called healthy like a soup, but this soup happens to also have 38 grams of sugar. So we need to really pay attention to how much sugar. It's not just an all or none. It's staying within the limits of 24 grams in 24 hours. So the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease spectrum, all is not meant to be doom and gloom here. This is very reversible. And this is why I do what I do as a pediatric gastroenterologist. Because if I can educate the children and catch it early, we can often reverse this entirely before it gets into these later stages where it becomes cirrhotic or turns into cancer, just as would be the case with too much chronic alcohol exposure. So we just need to catch it early, be aware, like Marion said, knowledge is power. And if we don't know, we can't improve ourselves. So when you have too much fat accumulating in the liver, which is from chronically having too much sugar, just like too much alcohol, then you develop this insulin resistance. And the same phenomenon happens, just like you would develop a beer belly from overconsumption, chronic overconsumption of alcohol. You develop this increase in visceral adiposity or increased waist circumference, which is one of the indicators of metabolic syndrome. And that's because of the excessive fat accumulation, again, in the liver, around the liver, in the organs of the abdominal cavity. But this is reversible, as I mentioned before. In children especially, this is easily reversible, curable, and treatable. And what's the fix? We need to just understand what's been available in the environment, that processed food really caused this disease. Remember that I was born in 1972. No child had NAFLD at that time. No child had fatty liver disease. No child had type 2 diabetes. There was only one type of diabetes, type 1 diabetes. The first children with type 2 diabetes and NAFLD and metabolic syndrome are starting to occur in the 1980s. So we know that something changed in our environment. And now if we have the knowledge and with that knowledge, we have the power to reverse this, we will take out all the excessive amounts of sugar that we're exposing our bodies to, and that will automatically lower the insulin. And when we lower our insulin, we'll fix that leptin resistance, which was the underlying feature of how we get metabolic syndrome. So we need to change the biochemistry. And so that's why I tell the kids there's really no diet. This is not about exercise and dieting or losing weight. We need to reduce the sugar that we're exposing ourselves to. And easy ways to do that is watch what we're drinking. Prefer that all the patients that I see drink primarily water, not to drink juice, especially not to drink any sugar-sweetened beverages. Fiber is really good to protect our livers from the effects of sugar. And when we eat real food, when we minimize the intake of ultra-processed foods, we naturally get more fiber. And we have to learn how to cook. Really, when we go back to the 1970s and 80s, how this all began is because the food industry duped us. They told us that it was okay to stop cooking at home, that they would feed us, that they make it easy. And they basically, fooled us by putting all sorts of chemicals and additives, not just sugar, into all of these foods. And if we don't pay attention to food labels, we don't know what we're putting in our body. So my big, message to all of you and to all of my patients is J.E.R.F, just eat real food. Prior to 1980s, people weren't getting these diseases. We were relying on what we cooked at home, and these diseases didn't exist. So if we eat what we cook at home, we won't have to worry about extra sugar because none of us are going to put that much sugar in our foods as what the food industry would put in. So just some summary slides here. Diet is the leading cause of death now in the United States, responsible for more than 5 times the fatalities of gun violence and car accidents combined, more than terrorism, more than smoking. Diet-driven diseases are now the #1 cause of preventable life years lost. 30 years ago, again, no children had type 2 diabetes, and now 1 in 4 teenagers in the United States are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And remember that 90% of diabetes in the world is now type 2 diabetes, which is part of the metabolic syndrome. And this is largely to be blamed on us, the medical professionals, public health. We have been for so long obsessed with body weight and how much people are eating that we've missed the underlying issue, which is the quality of the food that we're eating. We're actually probably on average consuming fewer calories than we did 20 or 30 years ago. It's not so much the calories, it's the quality, it's what's in the food, it's what's been done to that food that really matters. So examples that I come across in my daily practice, real food, eggs, real food, mung beans. But then there's products out there like this, which is for people who might not want to eat eggs or think that they're allergic perhaps to eggs. So this is a mung bean protein isolate, but all of the other additives, emulsifiers, chemicals, even sugar, tapioca syrup is sugar, added to this product and then sold to us as sort of a good healthy food made from plants, just egg. It has no egg in it. It's marketed as egg. It's marketed as beans, but it's actually ultra processed food. And these are the things that I worry about that children and adults were putting in our bodies. And this is why we see an epidemic of diet-driven diseases. So, if we go back to prior to this metabolic syndrome epidemic, the United States government used to spend triple on food and feeding its population than what it had to spend on treating them for medical diseases. Now it's almost the reverse. We spend double on healthcare compared to what we spend on feeding our population. And it's estimated by 2025, this is only going to get so much worse. We have now an epidemic of chronic diseases. 75% of chronic disease is reversible and preventable by just eating real food. So instead of eating food as a pill, which is that packaged product, the ultra-processed food, what we really need to do is replace our pills with food. Food is the best medicine. And that wholesome choice needs to be reinforced as the easier, healthier, and more beneficial choice. So my call to action, and as I end this, is just to say, let's learn how to cook. Let's understand the value of cooking at home, eating real food, just eat real food, because none of these chronic diseases are really curable. We can put Band-Aids on them by giving pills and injections, but these chronic diseases, they're truly not druggable, but they are what my mentor says, Dr. Robert Lustig, they're foodable. I know that it sounds easy or sounds simple, but I certainly am not saying that it's easy, but I really do believe that if we don't take our health back from the food industry, that we are not going to be fighting well against this epidemic of chronic disease, largely due to the chronic metabolic syndrome. And with that, I'm going to close and I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pisharody. You, as we know, you are raising the alarms. Everybody can turn on their cameras if they'd like. And if you have any questions, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. What we do as an organization, Eating for Your Health, is just that, to teach people what is the difference between the food that is real food that is feeding you and your body and your brain, and what are those food-like substances that might fill your belly but aren't really feeding your body. So it isn't easy when you're also dealing with a family who's used to eating in a certain way and they don't have that palate for healthier foods. And one of the reasons why Dr. Pisharody reached out to us was because we have recipes on our website that have no processed foods. There's no processed flours, no processed sugars. They're all gluten-free. Many are vegan +1, so there's ways to adapt them to different eating styles. But they're delicious. And we're not saying that everybody needs to go 180 degrees completely different to what they've been used to eating. It's an incremental change. If you try and do too much too fast, oftentimes the process can be rejected. And we don't want that. We want that nutritional harm reduction, easing your way into removing foods that don't feed your body and your brain, adding more that do. So if anybody, again, if people have questions, we'd be happy to answer. We are holding our What's in Your Grocery Cart, which is a program that we deliver every month, where we just explain about healthy eating and ways to shop and ways to look at food in the grocery store, so you really do understand what it is that you're buying, making sure that you're looking at the ingredient lists. If there's something in there that is not recognizable as a food product, then it probably is not. And that's the job of your liver and kidneys to extract that. And there's no nutritional value to it. So nutrient dense is what we ask people to look for, those products that don't have the labels, the whole fruits, the whole vegetables, the whole grains, the food that looks as close to it as it did in nature. So nuts and seeds are your friends. Frozen vegetables are your friends. They're the whole foods that we need.
Yeah. And yes, so I purposely put together these slides to sort of put a little bit of fear in everyone's minds, because I don't think this is told to most people. We have focused so incorrectly as a medical professional about eating less, restricting calories, going on diets, losing weight. And what I want everyone to understand is, I don't care what you weigh. I don't care how much you eat. I just want you to eat for your health. And that means eating real food, not food-like substances. And I agree completely with Marian. This is not something you can do overnight. You need to do it in a gradual way. And it's my job to impart the knowledge upon you so that you understand why.
I add a lot more vegetables to my chili than I ever did before. I add a lot more vegetables to to pasta sauces than I ever did before. We eat smaller portions of pastas and larger portions of different vegetables, and just exploring the produce department and seeing right now we're heading into our growing season, and just experimenting with different foods and different seasonings. And, when we talk about eating the rainbow, and that is, every different colored food in your produce department has different phytonutrients. So a green pepper and a red pepper and a purple pepper and a purple carrot all contribute in a different way. And then the herbs and spices that you add to things is also part of that rainbow. So just really experimenting and adding things and boosting that flavor with some of the fresh, delicious herbs and spices that we have, and trying different recipes. So as Valerie said, it is getting started. It's just one little step, looking at those nutrition labels and looking at what has less sugar. If you're eating a yogurt, which one has less sugar? Yogurts, dairy products are good. A lot of times people have issues digesting dairy products, not because of the dairy, but because of the other additives that might be in it. Low fat products have different additives. Low sugar products have different additives. So just, subtracting those food products that have too many things in them that really aren't food.
So part of what the food industry does is they take away things. And because when they take away things, they change the taste of that food, they add something. And it's what they've added that probably does us more harm than what they've taken away. Somebody has asked about just sort of how you can improve your liver health. If I had to say one thing, it would be fiber. You can never undervalue the importance of fiber. If I could add one thing to my diet, it would always be fiber. As Marian said, add vegetables. And remember, fiber, intact whole fiber, has to come from real food. It's not in a supplement. It's from real food.
John, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the lecture. It was excellent. I had a question regarding smoothies. So in my smoothies, I have them about 75% greens and 25% fruit. Then I add some flaxseed and chia seed. Is that okay?
Yes. So again, to make it palatable, adding a little fruit in that way seems very reasonable and healthy to me. You just want to keep your overall average intake under 24 grams. Green smoothies are totally fine because vegetables don't have sugar to be liberated per se. And a little bit of that sugar is being liberated from the fruit, but you're getting all the other benefits of that fruit and vegetable and all those micronutrients from your smoothie. That doesn't worry me. That's nothing compared to all the added sugars that we can get from the processed food.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody always starts to worry about their smoothies.
Yeah.
Flax seeds are wonderful to add. I know another little tip is to put flax seeds in a pepper grinder. And then you can just grind the flax seeds and add it into your foods. Mm-hmm. So just easy ways to add increase the nutrients that are in your food, and you don't even notice them. Chia seeds are also a power punch of nutrition. Let's see, what is your take on sweeteners to make it tastier?
And so I'm assuming this question is regarding the non-caloric sweeteners, the artificial sweeteners. They too have been shown to increase our insulin levels, and I'll explain why. So some of the artificial sweeteners like Splenda, sucralose, for instance, is actually going to be 70 times sweeter in that moment you put it on your tongue compared to real sugar. That hyper intense sweetness on your tongue is actually going to send a signal in the first few microseconds to your brain that sugar might be coming, and you will have some insulin secretion from your pancreas in that moment. Of course, later on, your brain understands that's not really sugar, there's no calories, but that insulin secretion would have happened. Probably not to the extent that had you eaten real sugar, but it's not entirely, devoid of that insulin response. Plus, I worry about the effect on the gut microbiome from some of these artificial sweeteners. They are, after all, sometimes chemicals. So honestly, if I had to choose between some 15 or 20 grams of 24 grams of sugar I was going to get in my day, I would prefer I get it from real sugar than the artificial stuff.
Somebody has a question about stevia, which is it's an herb extract, right? But it's...
Mm-hmm. So definitely safer than the artificial sweeteners. In excessive amounts, it can cause some bloating and gas, but it is one of the safer alternatives. Also, though, when you have something sweet because of stevia, we don't know if that might also trigger some of the insulin response.
One other thing that we do know is that when you, as Dr. Pisharody talked about, everybody's always concerned about calories. I had somebody say, he said, I'm always hungry. I said, well, keep some almonds in your car and, grab a handful of almonds. He said, do you know how many calories are in almonds? I might as well have a Big Mac. And I was like, I just want to jump up there. Like, no, it's not the same. It's not the same at all.
Well, 150 calories from a handful of almonds versus 150 calories maybe from a mini Snickers bar. Calories are the same. But those almonds with their fiber and their good type of fat, they're not going to be metabolically harmful to you. So, but the 150 calories from that sweet chocolate bar, they're going to do metabolic harm to you. They're going to rapidly rise your insulin. That is what I worry about, not the calories.
So that's the other, one of the things that we talk about is serving sizes. So a handful of something is a good serving size for many people. So my handful is different than my brother-in-law's handful, who can palm a basketball, and he's, much bigger than I am. So what's going to satisfy him and what satisfies me is based on your own hand size. And then when you just really restrict or reduce the amount of those processed foods, the calories, the weight just kind of takes care of itself. So let's see, we've got some other questions here. What are some fiber protein snacks for someone who doesn't like nuts and can't tolerate dairy or gluten?
So the way I think about fiber is anything that has an outer bran, husk, or peel. And little lesson on fiber, there's two types, insoluble and soluble. So take an apple, the peel doesn't dissolve in water. You could put that peel in a cup of water overnight. It's not going to dissolve. That's insoluble fiber. That, anything with that peel is going to have that insoluble fiber. And then the inner core, the pulp of the fruit is sort of the soluble fiber, the stuff you can make the juice into. So any food that naturally has a peel or a husk, those are fiber-rich foods. So you mentioned you don't like nuts, I think, but vegetables, fruits, whole grains, seeds, lentils, any of these foods would be great options when you're looking for something with fiber. And it's that insoluble fiber part that gets destroyed in the blender. So soluble fiber stays intact, but the insoluble fiber is blenderized into smithereens. So that's why the sugar gets liberated.
Chewing is important.
And yeah, chewing using a mortar and pestle, all of those old-fashioned, those don't disturb the fiber. It's these modern-day blenders.
Okay. Melanie, you had a question about the curriculum, and Dr. Kelly said she will be passing that on to the people who address those issues. And of course, this is an important topic that we want to address. Let's see, if you are diagnosed with gestational diabetes, do you have a better chance of getting diabetes later in life?
Yes, because when you have gestational diabetes, you're already showing that you're somewhat insulin resistant. So I'm not saying that gestational diabetes leads to diabetes later on in life, but that's a signal to you that you've become somewhat insulin resistant. And so you would want to proactively make sure you're taking the right steps to reverse that sooner rather than later.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. I hope that you feel enlightened and empowered to know what to do to improve your health and your health outcomes, and join us for other programs. We're also looking for places to who want to hear about eating for your health. We are developing new curriculum to share, some programming for young people that will be ready later, hopefully, well, definitely by September. But we really do appreciate you taking your time and spending it with us tonight to learn about ways to eat for your health. So we hope to see you soon. Thank you, Dr. Pisharody, so much, Dr. Kelly and Valerie, for giving us this opportunity. And we wish you good health, and get out there to the farmers market.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.